It wasn't typed. It wasn't emailed. It wasn't passed through any formal channel. It was a torn envelope, its edges frayed like the hands that likely sealed it. And inside, on a piece of lined notebook paper, in fading blue ink, were just 11 words. If America First is really for the people, meet me at Hope Haven Dock. No signature. No return address. Just a name scrawled in the corner. Captain Roy Banner. Karoline Leavitt, 27 years old. White House press secretary read the letter twice, then a third time. Her staff had placed it in the odd but probably harmless pile. But she didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes. She froze. Hope Haven Dock, a forgotten harbor town tucked along the Maine coast about 160 miles northeast of D.C., cold, windswept, and dying like so many working-class corners of the country. Karoline had never been there, but she'd heard the name in letters, emails, whispered complaints from fishermen, truckers, welders, and small-town mayors who felt like America First had somehow skipped their zip codes. And now, a challenge had landed directly on her desk. A dare wrapped in salt air and defiance. She didn't call a press team. She didn't loop in the communications director. She didn't even grab an aide. Instead, she pulled on a black coat, stepped into her 4-year-old Ford Explorer, and typed the coordinates into her GPS. Hope Haven, Maine. Population 194. Drive time 3 hours, 42 minutes. As the winter sun began to dip over the Potomac, Karoline turned onto I-95 North, gripping the wheel tighter than usual. No cameras, no security detail, no speech in her hand. Just that letter and the question gnawing at her spine. What kind of man sends a handwritten note to the White House and expects an answer? By the time she pulled into Hope Haven, it was dark and bone-chilling cold. The Atlantic wind cut like glass through her coat as she stepped onto the creaking dock. Salt water sprayed against the pilings, and the air reeked of diesel fish and quiet fury. And then she saw him. He stood beside an old lobster boat that looked like it had seen 2 world wars and still wasn't done fighting. He wore a thick flannel jacket, a beanie pulled low over his grizzled forehead, and his eyes narrowed under the dim dock light. Captain Roy Banner, late 60s, built like the bow of his boat, battered but solid. "You really came," he said, not hiding the surprise in his voice. Karoline nodded, squinting in the wind. "You wrote to me." He let out a dry laugh. "Didn't think a White House suit would show. Figured y'all would send a press release." "I'm not here to give you a soundbite," she replied, stepping closer, boots thudding on the wet wood. "I came to listen," Roy scoffed, turning back to untie a thick rope from the piling. "Then get on board." Karoline hesitated just a second. "Now you said you care about the people. Let's see if you can stomach where we live." She stepped onto the boat, bare, cold metal beneath her heels. No Secret Service, no safety briefing. Just the open sea ahead. The engine roared to life. Roy pushed off and they drifted into the black water, swallowed by the fog of the Atlantic. For nearly 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. The wind whipped across the deck, salt sprayed her coat, and Karoline stood silently watching the dark outline of the coast shrink behind them. Finally, Roy spoke, voice rough from years of salt and shouting over engines. "You ever seen a man gut 100 pounds of haddock just to make $50? Karoline didn't answer. Roy pressed on. "I used to run 3 boats, employed 12 men. We supplied half the town. Now 1 boat, 2 crew. The rest are driving Ubers or fixing fences in Portland." He reached into a dented metal box, pulled out a torn ledger, and held it under the boat's hanging light. "See this? That's fuel. That's gear. That's taxes. Every month I'm deeper in the hole. But the big guys, those seafood corporations, they're swallowing everything. Offshore quotas, subsidies, lobbyists. They buy up permits, crush the little guy. He paused, turning his eyes toward her like searchlights. Tell me, press secretary, is that America first? The question landed like an anchor. Karoline opened her mouth, then closed it. Her fingers gripped the metal railing. I don't have all the answers, she said finally, her voice lower than usual. But I came to hear this, not to explain it away. Roy watched her, quiet now, testing her like he would a greenhorn on deck. You know what happens when you gut a fish wrong? He asked. Karoline blinked. No. You waste it. It rots. You disrespect the life it gave. That's what they're doing to us, gutting us wrong, calling it free market, then leaving us to rot. As the boat turned back toward the dock, Karoline stared out at the waves. She wasn't thinking about Twitter, or CNN, or who'd spin this in tomorrow's news cycle. She was thinking about a man who challenged the most powerful office in the land with a piece of paper and a pen. And how for the first time in weeks, she felt like she wasn't just speaking for America, but hearing it speak back. As Roy cut the engine and tied off the boat, he handed her something. A fillet knife, its handle worn, its blade still sharp. If you come back, he said, you learn to use this. Then maybe we'll believe Washington gives a damn. Karoline nodded, slipping it into her coat pocket. She didn't smile, but something in her eyes flickered resolve, maybe. This wasn't just a photo op. This was a storm, and she was headed straight into it. The morning sun hadn't burned through the fog when Karoline Leavitt returned to Hope Haven. The gulls circled overhead, crying out like restless ghosts, and the scent of brine and motor oil clung thick in the air. Word had spread fast. She hadn't come alone this time. Roy Banner's challenge had shaken something loose inside her, and she brought answers. A folder thick with proposed reforms, fuel rebates, permit protections, trade reviews, names of officials in Washington who'd agreed to listen, maybe even act. But not everyone welcomed her. As she stepped off the dock ladder, clutching the damp binder to her chest, a voice rang out loud and sharp like a buoy bell in a storm. You think a pretty press secretary can save us with a spreadsheet? Crowd parted like the tide. And there stood Kellen Briggs, mid-60s gray beard, heavy frame sleeves rolled to his elbows, like he'd just hauled in the ocean itself. A legend around here. Roy's former partner, and one of the last men in Hope Haven who still owned his boat outright. He wasn't smiling. Karoline paused, keeping her posture calm. Mr. Briggs, I'm here to... But he cut her off with a raised hand and a glare. Don't Mr. Briggs me like you know what it means to bury a friend at sea. Like you've ever watched a boat take on water and realized you had to choose between the gear or the crew. A murmur rippled through the gathering fishermen, their boots scuffing the old wooden planks of the dock. A few nodded. Others crossed their arms. Karoline clenched the folder tighter, but her voice stayed even. I'm not pretending I've lived your life, she said, her words crisp. But I didn't come here to talk over you. I came to listen and fix what I can. Kellen let out a low, bitter chuckle. Fix? What are you gonna fix, Miss DC? Your people send us subsidies that don't cover a month's fuel. You bring proposals while the bank's calling to seize my neighbor's trawler. He pointed at her binder like it was an insult. Do those numbers save a man from drowning when his boat fails because he can't afford parts? Karoline took a breath. The salt air stung her eyes, but she didn't blink. No. They don't, she admitted, but they're a start. The wind picked up. Her coat flapped behind her. Still, she didn't move. Roy Banner stepped from the crowd, folding his arms. She came back. Kellen, that counts for something. Kellen turned to him sharply. So what, you think one trip and a few good intentions are enough? You bury a friend last winter, Roy. Because I did. Davy Reynolds. Froze to death trying to fix his rig mid-haul because he couldn't afford a new winch. He turned back to Karoline, voice rising. Don't talk to me about starts. We're past that. What we need is someone who fights like their life depends on it, not someone with a nice coat and camera crews. The crowd roared in approval. Some shouted, others stayed silent but didn't walk away. Karoline's jaw tightened. The sting of judgment. The dismissiveness. The anger of people who believed she'd never get it because she hadn't hauled nets or lost a cousin to a snapped anchor chain. She was 27. Female. In a tailored coat. To them she might as well have been made of paper. But she stood her ground. I didn't come here to impress anyone with a title or a folder, she said, stepping forward so she was toe-to-toe with Kellen. I came because I saw a man call out the government with a torn letter, and I realized he was right. The doc went still. She held up the folder. Not as a shield, as proof. These aren't theories. These are real proposals. And yes, they need work. I know the policy won't fix every hull or pay off every mortgage. Her voice sharpened, steady but electric. But if your anger stops every person who tries to help, what hope do you have left? Kellen's face twitched. The anger was still there, but something else flickered too. You ever bury someone at sea? He asked again, but this time his voice was quieter. Not a challenge. A wound. Karoline looked him in the eyes. No, she said simply. But I've stood in rooms where people who could help didn't even know your names. She handed him the folder. Now they do. He stared at it. Weathered fingers, hesitating. The crowd watched every breath caught in salt air. Finally, slowly, he took it. I'll read it, he muttered. Roy clapped a hand on his shoulder. That's more than you've said to DC in 10 years. Karoline exhaled, her breath visible in the cold air. Then came a voice from the back. Hey, Leavitt. You willing to ride a winter line with us next week? See what it's really like? Laughter rippled. But Karoline didn't flinch. Yes, she said without pause. I'll bring my own gear. Someone whistled. Even Kellen raised an eyebrow. You better not slow us down, he said, but it didn't carry the same bite. Karoline nodded, half smiling. Then don't wait up. That night, the dockside showdown made headlines. White House press secretary challenged by lobstermen in Maine. Leavitt faces fire from fishermen and holds her ground. America First is Washington finally listening. But back in D.C., things were just heating up. Senior advisor Richard Hayes slammed the newspaper on the table the next morning. You let a fisherman yell at you on camera. Karoline poured coffee, calm as a New England tide. He had every right to. Do you have any idea what kind of message that sends? Karoline looked him square in the eye. Yeah. It says we're not afraid to stand on the dock and take the heat. The wind had picked up by late afternoon. The sun was low, casting long amber streaks across the narrow roads of Hope Haven, Maine. Karoline Leavitt hadn't planned on staying after the dock confrontation, but something held her there. Maybe it was the uneasy look Kellen Briggs gave her as he turned away with the folder. Maybe it was the quiet nod Roy Banner gave her like he knew something she didn't. Or maybe it was the soft voice of the woman standing in the doorway of the worn, clapboard house just off the harbor road. Miss Leavitt, would you care to join us for supper? She turned and saw her. Mira Briggs, Kellen's wife. Late 50s, gentle eyes, her hands dusted with flower apron tied loosely over a faded blue sweater. There was no press crew, no flashing cameras. Just a kitchen light behind her and the smell of something warm in the air. Karoline hesitated only a moment. I'd be honored, she said quietly. The house was small, maybe 1,000 square feet, but clean and well kept. Family photos lined the hallway walls, weddings, birthdays. One worn picture of a young boy in a life vest, standing proudly beside a fishing boat. They sat in the kitchen, Karoline across from Mira, at a table marked by time and saltwater stories. Kellen didn't speak much, still brooding, arms crossed as he leaned against the counter. Mira brought over 2 simple plates. A piece of pan-seared haddock caught fresh that morning, a scoop of plain white rice, some sautéed greens, a pitcher of tap water and 2 mismatched coffee mugs. No fanfare, no garnish. Karoline stared for a second. It was the humblest meal she'd eaten in years. "Thank you," she said, her voice lower than usual. Mira smiled softly and sat down. Then, almost as if she needed the quiet to say it, she began, "My son, Caleb. He used to beg his daddy to take him out on the boat. 5 years old, out there at 4 a.m., shivering but smiling, wanting to be just like him." Karoline nodded slowly, her fork pausing mid-air. "But he's gone now." Mira continued, her voice steady but thin. "Not dead, just gone from here. Works in a call center up in Portland. He told me last year, Mama, if being like Dad means being broke and broken, who'd want to follow that?" The room fell still. Karoline set her fork down gently. For the first time all day, she didn't know what to say. Mira wasn't crying, but the pain in her voice was sharper than tears. Kellen looked away, his jaw tight. "We gave everything to this place," Mira whispered. "Everything. And now, we can't even convince our own child that it's a life worth living." Karoline's throat tightened. This wasn't about policy anymore. Not rebates, not trade. Not the gas prices or permit fees or export quotas she had printed on the papers in her leather briefcase. This was about dignity, about generational loss, about a future fading while the country's leaders sat in offices far away. "He used to bring me coffee in a thermos," Mira said, smiling faintly. "Used to say, 'You're the only person who wakes up earlier than the sea.' Now he won't even come visit. Says it hurts too much." Karoline looked around the kitchen. The old refrigerator buzzed quietly. The ceiling fan creaked overhead. The place felt like a time capsule, a home still fighting to survive, while the world outside sprinted past it. "I'm sorry," Karoline said, her voice cracking a little. I don't have a good answer for that." Mira reached across the table and touched her hand. "You came. That's more than most," she said simply. "But don't stop now. Don't let this be just another visit from someone who meant well." Kellen finally spoke. "She's right," he said, his voice gravelly. "You want to help us? Then make damn sure no more kids have to choose between feeding their families and abandoning their roots." Karoline nodded, tears forming in her eyes, but she blinked them away. She finished the meal, every bite. And when she stood to leave, Mira handed her a small, foil-wrapped package. "Leftovers," she said. "You'll be hungry later." Karoline took it with both hands, stunned. "Thank you." As she walked back to her SUV, night settling over the harbor, she looked out over the water. The lights of the few remaining boats glimmered like fading stars. She sat in the driver's seat, unwrapped the foil, and stared at the extra piece of haddock. It wasn't just fish. It was a piece of someone's life. A story. A sacrifice. A mother's love wrapped in aluminum and quiet hope. She opened her phone. Typed one line into her notepad. "Protecting the working class isn't theory. It's the last defense against a country forgetting who it is." She hit save and started the car. The next morning, Hope Haven was a different world. The sky had turned steel gray. Wind howled down from the Atlantic like an angry memory. Waves crashed harder against the dock pilings, sending bursts of salt spray into the air. Most boats were still moored, tied down tightly in anticipation of a rough afternoon. But not the Evelyn Rose. That was Kellen Briggs' fishing vessel, 35 feet long, weather-beaten, but solid. It had survived 2 hurricanes and a deck fire, and today it was going back out. Karoline stood at the edge of the dock, wind whipping her long coat as she stared at the vessels. "You sure you're up for this?" Kellen asked gruffly, stepping down from the cabin with a skeptical look. "Forecast says gusts up to 45 miles per hour. Seas are at 8 feet and rising." Karoline looked at him, then at the boat. Her hand still held the foil-wrapped haddock from Mira, now tucked safely in her coat pocket, a quiet reminder. "I'm not here to just talk," she said. "Let me learn the way you live it." Kellen raised an eyebrow, partly amused, partly incredulous. "Then get aboard." She climbed aboard, carefully gripping the slick railing. Salt water stung her cheeks. Her neat black slacks were already soaked to the knee. Kellen handed her a life jacket. "You steer," he said suddenly. Karoline froze. "What you want to understand us, then feel the weight of guiding this thing through a storm." A cameraman from the small documentary crew invited by Mia Torres to capture real footage hesitated but kept filming from the dock. The footage, still raw and uncut, would later explode online. Karoline stepped into the helm, her hands gripping the weathered wooden wheel. The engine groaned as Kellen guided the throttle. They pushed out. The waves slapped the hull like slaps from an angry hand. The wind shrieked across the bow. Karoline tried to steady the wheel, but the boat bucked wildly with every surge of water. Her jaw tightened. "This is what we deal with," Kellen shouted over the roar. "When the markets crash, when the permits cost more than the catch, when DC forgets we even exist." A rogue wave slammed the starboard side. The boat tilted sharply. Karoline lost her footing, her heels slipping across the wet fiberglass. Her right hand instinctively grabbed for the railing. Her body swung halfway out over the Atlantic, her legs scrambling for traction. The camera caught the moment in full. A 27-year-old White House press secretary in a ripped coat and drenched skirt, dangling one arm over the sea. Mira, watching from shore, gasped audibly. The crew froze. But Karoline didn't fall. Her fingers locked around the cold steel of the railing. Her arm burned, her coat tore down the side, but she pulled herself back to her feet. Her face streaked with sea spray and mud twisted into something new. Not fear, not pride, just fire. "I've got it," she gasped, wiping her face. "I'm not done yet." Kellen stared at her, stunned. He'd expected a retreat, a scream, maybe even tears. But not this. "Your hands are shaking," he muttered. "So are yours," she replied, managing a half-smile through chattering teeth. He barked a short, unexpected laugh. "All right, kid. Let's bring her around." They turned back toward shore. When they docked again, the entire town had gathered, fishermen, shopkeepers, kids still in school sweatshirts. Word had spread fast. Someone had texted Mira. The footage was already uploading. Karoline climbed off the boat slowly, clothes, ruined hair, wild, one heel missing, but she was walking tall. Mia approached, phone in hand. "We caught everything. You good with that?" Karoline nodded. "Let the country see." Within an hour, the video was on Instagram, YouTube, and X, formerly Twitter. Mia captioned it simply, "Karoline Leavitt, dragged by the sea. Didn't let go. America first #Hope Haven test." It went viral in under 45 minutes. Seniors on Facebook reposted it with captions like, "Finally someone who gets her hands dirty." Veterans on forums commented, "She's got guts. I respect that." Even a few skeptical press outlets noted the intensity of the moment. But back in Hope Haven, something else happened. Kellen, normally stoic as granite, walked up to her quietly after the crowd began to thin. "You could have let go." She shook her head. "So could you. Every day. But you don't." He looked at her for a long second, then extended his hand. "Come by tomorrow morning," he said. "I want to show you the logbooks. Maybe even let you handle the nets. We've got a lot to fix. But I think you mean it." Karoline shook his hand firmly. "I do." That night, back at Mira's kitchen table, Mira handed her a dry sweatshirt and a cup of strong black coffee. "You're soaked," she said gently. Karoline smiled sore from head to toe. "Yeah, but I think I finally see what you're fighting for." Mira nodded. "We never wanted pity," she said. "We just wanted someone to ride the storm with us, even for a day." The calm after the storm didn't last long. 2 days after Karoline Leavitt's near fall into the Atlantic, the viral video had passed 10 million views. Major networks were circling the story. Her face, streaked with seawater and grit, had become a symbol of raw political courage. The hashtag America First means something was trending coast to coast. But while the country praised her, something darker was brewing in Hope Haven. At 9:12 a.m., a sleek black SUV pulled up beside the Briggs family home. The tires barely crunched gravel before the door swung open. Out stepped Greg Vance, Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions at Marivex Holdings, one of the largest corporate real estate conglomerates in the Northeast. He was dressed in a crisp navy suit, shoes so polished you could see your reflection. In one hand, a silver briefcase. In the other, a manila envelope. Tom Briggs, Kellen's younger brother, stood on the porch, arms folded, jaw clenched. "You're not welcome here," Tom muttered. Vance didn't blink. "I'm not here for trouble. I'm here to make your life easier." He opened the briefcase, laid the contract on a wooden crate, and slid it forward like a poker player, revealing his hand. "If you sign today," Vance said smoothly, "we pay off the mortgage. Full release. You keep the house, no foreclosure. And bonus, you walk away with $85,000. Cash." Tom didn't touch the paper. Vance leaned closer, voice syrupy and cold. "But if you don't, the bank takes everything next Friday. Look around, this offer is generous. Some would say merciful." Just then the barn door creaked open. Karoline stepped out from the shadows. Dressed in jeans, boots, and a simple navy windbreaker, she held a phone in her hand, already live on Instagram and Facebook. Behind her, Mia Vega, the young green-haired journalist, whispered to the camera, "We're live in Hope Haven. Corporate rep just tried to buy out the Briggs family. Wait till you hear the threat." Karoline's voice cut clean and strong through the morning air. "Did you just threaten a veteran fisherman with foreclosure while offering him pennies for his legacy?" Vance blinked. His practiced calm faltered. "This is private business." Karoline stepped closer. "No, Mr. Vance. When your private business destroys coastal families, it becomes public justice." She turned the phone fully toward him. Tom crossed his arms. "You said we'd lose the house in a week. But I checked. Bank hasn't filed anything yet." Vance stiffened. Karoline smiled grimly. "Lying to force a signature. That's fraud. And you just said it on live stream." Vance reached for the papers. "This is all being misinterpreted." Mia's voice came from behind the lens. 3 million people are watching, Greg. You want to clarify your mercy?" The comment section exploded. Seniors reposted the video with captions like, "This is the corruption we've been screaming about, and God bless this young woman for standing up." Vance tried to recover. "We're offering relief in hard times. These coastal properties are undervalued. We're giving them a way out." Karoline raised the contract to the camera. "They're not undervalued. They're being targeted. Marivex waits until fishermen are behind on mortgages, then swoops in like vultures. She turned to the crowd forming nearby, fellow fishermen, neighbors, and even students from the local high school. Their phones were out. Their eyes locked on the confrontation. "You're not buying land," Karoline said, voice ringing with fury. "You're trying to buy people's souls, their stories, their families." Tom looked at her, then at the contract, and set it on fire with a flick of his Zippo. The flames curled the edges, blackening the Marivex logo. "I'm not selling," he said simply. Vance's face drained of color. He turned storming back to the SUV reporters, now flooding him with questions. Karoline stood firm as the black SUV peeled away. Mia lowered her phone, grinning. "That's gonna break 5 million views by tonight." But Karoline didn't smile. Instead, she turned to the crowd. "Listen to me," she said, her voice calm but burning. "This isn't just happening here. Marivex is doing this across America, from Maine to Louisiana, buying up land after natural disasters, preying on people in debt. And now they're targeting fishermen." She pointed to a map posted on a folding table behind her, marked with red pins at every coastal foreclosure Marivex had touched in the past year. "We're launching an investigation, and I'm taking this to Washington." A roar of applause rose from the docks. Later that night, Karoline sat in Mira Briggs's kitchen, sipping coffee while wiping mud from her jeans. "You were fierce today," Mira said softly, "but they'll come after you now." Karoline nodded. "Let them. The more they push, the harder I push back." Her phone buzzed an alert. The video had reached 3.7 million views in 8 hours. #Marivex Exposed was now trending nationally. In the top comment, a Vietnam veteran had written, "She's the real deal, not afraid of suits or storms. I trust her." Karoline's eyes lingered on that line. She knew this wasn't just a coastal problem anymore. It was a battle between everyday Americans and unchecked corporate greed, and the next round would be in the halls of power. The rain outside the White House windows hadn't let up all morning, but Karoline Leavitt didn't notice. She stood just inside the Oval Office, soaked from the waist down, her boots caked with mud from the Hope Haven docks. In her hands, folded carefully inside a plastic evidence sleeve, was a torn piece of fishing net, weather-beaten, salt-stained, and fraying at the corners. She placed it on the president's desk without a word. Donald Trump, now back in office and brimming with the same defiant energy that powered his rallies, looked down at the net. His brows furrowed. He picked it up, slowly rubbed the coarse thread between his fingers, then looked up at her. "What's this?" he asked, the room unusually quiet. Karoline didn't blink. "It belonged to Kellen Briggs," she said softly. "He gave it to me the day I almost got blown off his fishing boat in a nor'easter. Told me to hold on to it and remember one thing." She paused, then continued, voice steady and low. "Don't promise, if you're not going to keep it." Trump leaned back in his chair, tapping the desk. His expression shifted from curiosity to something sharper, resolve. Karoline could feel the room begin to change. Behind her, Chief of Staff Ray Connors shifted uneasily. He had seen too many proposals crash and burn in this room. But this didn't feel like one of them. Not today. "You came all the way from Hope Haven in this storm just to give me a piece of old netting?" Trump asked, half smiling but clearly intrigued. Karoline stepped forward. "No, sir. I came to start a war." There was silence for a beat. Trump leaned forward again, a grin breaking across his face. "War against who? Marivex Holdings and every other corporate giant buying out America's coastal towns under the guise of development." She tossed a stack of documents onto the desk, live stream transcripts, signed witness statements, foreclosure notices, and a map with red dots peppering the eastern seaboard. "They wait until these folks fall behind on bills," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Then they move in, buying up boats, docks homes and families' legacies for pennies. It's not just Hope Haven. It's Maine. It's Louisiana. It's the Great Lakes. They're stealing our coastline. Trump flipped through the pages. You want to go to war with billion-dollar real estate trusts? He said, half amused. That'll make some enemies. Karoline nodded. I'm not worried about enemies. I'm worried about people like Kellen Briggs, who buried 2 friends lost at sea last year and might lose his home next week because some hedge fund thinks his dock makes a pretty hotel view. She tapped the net again. This isn't just string. It's their story. Trump grew quiet. He set the documents down, stood slowly, and walked to the window. Rain tapped the glass in rhythmic defiance. Then, without turning, he said, "You know what I like about you, Karoline. You're not afraid of bad weather or bad press." He turned back around, grabbed a thick folder marked Draft Pilot Policy, Coastal Protection Act, and pulled a pen from his breast pocket. "You're proposing a federal pilot program for coastal fishing towns?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Start with Maine. Freeze land acquisition from non-local corporations. Stabilize fishing prices. Offer equipment subsidies, not handouts. And tie it all to verified employment data from the docks." Trump didn't hesitate. He flipped to the final page, uncapped the pen, and signed with a flourish. "Done," he said, slapping the folder shut. "You've got your pilot. Maine is your battleground. Show me it works, and we scale it nationwide." Karoline exhaled, tension dropping from her shoulders. She hadn't even realized she'd been holding her breath. "You just gave hope to every dock in America, Mr. President," she said quietly. Trump shrugged, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Nah, you did." A moment later, the door opened and Mia Vega burst into the hallway, camera rolling. She caught Karoline stepping out of the Oval Office with the signed folder in hand, net still under her arm, eyes gleaming. "Mia," Karoline called, "it's happening. Pilot policy. Maine." Mia gasped and immediately turned to the camera. "Breaking news," she said. "America's youngest press secretary just got President Trump to greenlight the first federal protection policy for coastal fishermen in decades." The live stream exploded, over 400,000 viewers in under 10 minutes. Back in Hope Haven, Kellen Briggs was sitting at the kitchen table when the notification pinged on his old flip phone. Mira looked up from the stove, squinting. "What's that sound?" Kellen read the headline out loud, his voice cracking just slightly. "White House launches Maine pilot to protect fishermen. Karoline Leavitt leads charge." He didn't say anything else, just reached over, picked up his ball cap from the windowsill and pulled it down tight. "She did it," he whispered. Mira smiled, her eyes welling up. She kept her promise. At that same moment, across senior centers and living rooms nationwide, older Americans sat forward in their chairs. Veterans in Pennsylvania, retired shrimpers in the Gulf, great-grandmothers who'd raised 5 kids on fishermen's wages in Oregon. They watched a young woman covered in rain and resolve step out of the White House, holding change in her hands. They saw their own daughters and granddaughters in her. And for the first time in years, they didn't just see policy. They saw hope. The morning fog clung to the harbor like a memory that refused to lift. Seagulls cried overhead, the waves lapped against the old wooden docks, and the scent of brine and diesel drifted through the crisp Maine air. Karoline Leavitt's black SUV rolled slowly onto the gravel path leading to Hope Haven's pier. The same path she'd once walked in heels, sinking into the mud, unsure of how deep this story would pull her. Now she stepped out in sturdy boots, windbreakers zipped tight, and eyes clearer than ever. Waiting near the end of the dock was Kellen Briggs. He stood straight despite the chill arms, folded hair more silver than gray, now dancing gently in the sea breeze. His weather-beaten face cracked into a half-smile as she approached. "Well," he said, his voice dry but warm, "you survived the ocean and politics. You're tougher than I gave you credit for." Karoline let out a soft laugh, the sound more tired than amused, but sincere. "I survived thanks to this town," she said, "and thanks to a man who made me pilot a boat during gale force winds, just to prove a point." Kellen raised an eyebrow, still smirking. "Lesson stuck, didn't it?" Before she could answer, a younger voice chimed in. "Hey, Karoline." She turned to see Elliot Kellen's son kneeling beside a coiled net, carefully mending it with thick, practiced fingers. The last time she saw him, he wouldn't even touch a net, wouldn't look at the boats, wouldn't speak about the water that stole his hope. Now he looked up at her with something she hadn't seen before: quiet determination. "I've been helping Dad again," Elliot said, a little shy, a little proud. "Didn't think I would. But if this life has a future now, I want to start over. For real." Karoline's throat tightened. She crouched beside him, brushing her hand across the frayed edge of the net. "You're not starting over," she said gently. "You're picking up where generations left off." Behind them, Mira Briggs stepped out of their modest coastal home, her arms wrapped in a thick shawl and a warm smile on her face. She carried something wrapped in cloth, simple but carefully prepared. "I made this for you," Mira said, handing Karoline the bundle. "Traditional fish loaf. Nothing fancy. But take it back to Washington." Karoline accepted it with both hands. "So you don't forget," Mira added, her voice softer now that people here are still waiting. Karoline looked down at the bundle, then back at the family who had once challenged her so fiercely, and now stood with her steady as the tide. She didn't try to hide the redness in her eyes. She stood, walked slowly back to the SUV, and paused before opening the door. One last look at the harbor, the nets, the boats, the hands that worked the sea long before hashtags and headlines, and she pulled out her phone. The screen reflected her face as she typed, eyes glistening. America, first, has to start with the oar, the net, the hands that feed us. We can't save every harbor overnight, but we can promise we won't forget who built this country. To Kellen, Mira. Elliot, thank you. The journey's not over. But we've begun. She hit post. The screen flickered as the image of the net, torn but mended, spread to millions again. Inside the SUV, she sat in the back seat, the fish loaf on her lap, the net clutched in her hand like a ribbon of memory. The driver asked if she was ready. She nodded, voice quiet. "Take me home." Back in Washington, the tide had already begun to turn. Her live streams were replayed on every cable news show. The New Hampshire pilot policy was gaining traction. Calls poured in from Michigan, Texas, Oregon. Farmers, lobstermen, shrimpers, dock workers. They didn't all agree with her politics. Some had never even heard her name before this story. But they knew sincerity when they saw it. And they knew when someone had walked their muddy roads. In retirement communities from Florida to Ohio, viewers talked about the young woman who took off her heels, stepped barefoot into the muck, and came back with something more valuable than votes, understanding. At the White House, the net now rested in a glass case in her office just above her computer. Visitors often asked why it was there. "It's not decoration," she'd say. "It's a promise." And in Hope Haven, Kellen walked with a stronger step again. Elliot's hands grew quicker at the nets, and Mira's laughter returned to the kitchen. Life was still hard. The sea still unpredictable. But now there was a sliver of light, enough to keep going. Enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, America still listened. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about the people who keep this country strong. One dock, one voice, one act of courage at a time.